So let's get some analysis and perspective on battleground Ontario and what to watch for as the campaign begins to unfold. Joining me from Toronto is Laura Stone, a Queen's Park reporter for the Globe and Mail, who has also covered federal politics here on Parliament Hill in Ottawa. And in Hamilton, Henry Jacek is a professor emeritus of political science at McMaster University and a longtime observer of politics and elections in Ontario. Welcome to you both. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Laura, let me start with you if I can. What will the key factors in a federal campaign be in Ontario? What will that look like?
Well, I think we're already seeing one of the key factors, which is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau taking on his key opponent, Doug Ford, Premier Doug Ford in the race. I mean, the most interesting thing that came out of the messaging on the federal budget that we saw is the way that the federal Liberals consistently attacked not leader Andrew Scheer, but Premier Doug Ford. So obviously he's going to be a key opponent, a key foe in the battleground of Ontario during the next election.
Professor Jacek, how do you see this, and how do you see the role of Doug Ford? Is he likely to be a really important factor in how the campaign unfolds in your province?
Well, it is up to him. I'm not sure how much he's going to do, although it might be very important. Certainly for the Liberals, I agree with their strategy. And looking at the public opinion polls and the votes in Ontario, there is a lot of movement between Liberal voters, New Democratic voters, and Green voters. That's the progressive side. And they move around. And if the Liberals can convince the New Democratic voters and the Green voters that they're the major opponent to Ford, Premier Ford, who they don't like at all, of course, then that's going to help them out a lot because they're right now in a very big hole. If you look at the public opinion polls, they are really way down from the last official election, the last election in Ontario, in Ontario in the federal election, and they're way down from where they were 4 years ago in the public opinion polls. They need to have a clear enemy, and Doug Ford may be the person who's going to fill that role and persuade these other voters, Green and New Democratic voters, to come over to the Liberals.
Laura Stone, beyond Doug Ford, is there an overarching issue you think will determine the outcome of the federal campaign in the province of Ontario?
Well, certainly the debate over climate change is going to be a big factor in the next election. And it's sort of what the Liberal government has been running on for the past 3.5 years, this balance between the economy and the environment. And it's also been one of the major messages of Doug Ford's government. And he has not shied away from taking on the federal government himself. Certainly, I think cost of living, affordability, especially in the GTA, that Toronto and Greater Toronto area, in the suburbs, and just this general sense that people's lives are getting more expensive, that they're not getting ahead. And I think that's going to be one of the major messages as well from Andrew Scheer in his campaign.
Professor Jacek, what will you be watching for?
Well, I'm watching for things that will overlap with Laura had to say, and particularly I've noted I want to look at the 40 NDP ridings that were won in the provincial election. And 29 of those were won by the federal Liberals 4 years ago. Those, I think, are going to be really critical ridings. And the NDP is probably going to put a lot of energy into those ridings because they already have a sitting MLA. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on the Liberals. And as I pointed out earlier, because there's a lot of movement between the Greens and the Liberals and the NDP, what the NDP is going to try to do is to get those people to vote for them and prevent their own supporters who went over to the Liberals, the federal Liberals 4 years ago, and make sure they stick with them and pull some of the Liberals over. And they will use issues like certainly cost of living, particularly in the center of the city, Scarborough, out to Brampton, and whether you have lower middle class voters, people who are really scrambling, living from paycheck to paycheck, and there's a lot of those. There's at least 10 of those ridings that are in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, and those are going to be prime ones. Plus, there's other opportunities for the NDP in southwestern Ontario, outside of Windsor, and also up north. So they have a lot of opportunities, and that's where I think the campaign, the NDP is really going to bring it to them. And of course, they have now a national leader who is from Ontario, who's from Southern Ontario, and whose hometown is Brampton, where there are 3 NDP provincial seats. So the Liberals have got their work cut out for them.
What are your thoughts on that, Laura?
I just get the sense, from talking to the different officials and parties at Queen's Park, that there's going to be the most integration on the ground with the NDP. Between the provincial and the federal MPP, I think we'll see some staffers go work on campaigns. Of course, Professor Jacek mentioned Brampton, and that's where Jagmeet Singh's brother actually holds a seat as well. I think the North is going to provide an opportunity with the strength of the NDP up there. But I certainly get the sense that, while someone like Doug Ford may attend a campaign event or two with Andrew Scheer, we're not going to see an influx of Conservative staffers leaving to go work on Andrew Scheer's campaign. I don't think there's the drive for that in the province of Ontario, but I think on the NDP front, there's going to be more people who move to do that kind of work for the federal party.
Yeah, we should talk about that. The advantages of cross-pollination if you have different people working for you. But that brings me back, I guess, a bit to the Doug Ford piece, Professor Jacek, and that is this natural tendency that if you have, a provincial, progressive conservative government in Ontario, there tends to be Ontario voters over time have sort of liked the idea of then having not a conservative government at the national level. Do you think that presents a problem for Andrew Scheer in Ontario?
Oh, for sure, because we do know the last 75 years there has been an sort of what people call the balance theory of Ontario and federal politics, where for most of those years the voters like to have 2 separate parties in Ottawa and at Queen's Park in Toronto. And so, that is an advantage certainly for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals to play that up. And that's why, as I said earlier, I think if Ford goes out to attack him, and even if he doesn't, maybe he'll bring the fire to Ford. And then, of course, I think Ford will respond. It's going to be hard for him not to do that, I think. It works to Justin Trudeau's strength to use the balance theory and say, listen, you have a premier, a conservative premier in Ontario. Look at all the damage he's been doing since he's been elected. And you have to make sure you have a strong Liberal government to counter him, to provide a check and balance to him. And that's what he's going to go after, the NDP voters on that, and the Green voters as well. He's going to essentially, and they're in the public opinion polls, they're doing pretty well right now. And so he certainly wants to get most of those Green voters in Ontario and bring them over to him. So he's got to, that's his strategy to dig out of the hole he's in right now.
Right. Laura, we've been talking a lot about trust and truth in our series this week and how those will play a role in the campaign. That brings me to the whole SNC-Lavalin affair. Polling shows that the Liberal brand is now starting to take a bit of a dent over this. Is it resonating, do you find, in Ontario?
I think some of the shine has certainly worn off of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in the midst of this scandal, or whatever you want to call it. The curtain's been peeled back on the operations of his office, and the credibility, I think, has been tested. Whether this impacts voters at the door, I'm not entirely sure yet. People really, and especially in provincial politics, issues like health and education, affordability, these are things that impact people's day-to-day lives. And so they're just, they're thinking about, how can I afford to buy a house, particularly in the Greater Toronto area. Is the price of gas going to go up? Why does it feel so expensive? I think certainly in progressive circles it has. And if you were an NDP voter in the previous election who put your faith in Justin Trudeau and to quote unquote do politics differently, I think it will impact some more of those progressive votes. But whether it will become a ballot box issue, I'm not entirely sure yet.
What are your thoughts on that, Professor Jacek? We'll end on that.
I think Laura's got the right idea there, is that the people who pay more attention to politics, better educated, more knowledgeable, they're paying attention to this issue. I just think that, people who are, ordinary education, everyday folks who are struggling to, balance the household budgets, I don't think they understand or really care much about that issue. They want to, as Laura said, they're interested in their quality of life, their ability to balance their budget, to get by day, and they want to know which party's going to do that. And I think, you know, the NDP has a pretty strong record on that. Of course, from, you know, the leader of the NDP provincially, Andrea Horvath, every time she gives a speech, she probably mentions that about 5 or 6 times. So, and the voters have cottoned on to the idea that basically a quality of life and affordability is an NDP strength.
All right. Listen, thank you both for your perspectives today. Henry Jacek, Laura Stone. Good to talk to you. Take care.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.